Hi, I'm Justin Moorman.
And I'm Katie Thornton, and this is the Re-Education of Schools podcast,
where we have open, honest conversations about how to better understand social-emotional learning, trauma-informed care, the whys behind student behavior, and how to help kids navigate it all as they go through school and life. All right, welcome to episode 16, the importance of play. We actually have a little surprise here in a minute that we'll talk about. I guess if you're watching it on YouTube, you already picked up on the surprise. But if you're not, if you're just listening to it, we have a surprise here in a second. But in this episode, we'll be talking a little bit about, again, just what it says, the importance of play and how that factors in, probably specifically in a school setting, right? I think we would all recognize that play is important overall. With children and really just with humans, let's be honest.
Yeah.
But I think that this episode we're going to be able to dive into how that factors into the school setting a little bit more. And good news, if you're kind of tired of hearing from just us, we actually have our very first guest on the podcast, Dr. Julie Biddle. And Katie, I don't know if you want to take just a minute to introduce her a little bit.
Yeah, I am super excited to have a dear friend of mine join us today. Dr. Julie Biddle is a PhD, is a professor with a concentration coordinator at Antioch University. She teaches primarily in the graduate certificate program on the Reggio Emilia approach that she has developed. Julie started her educational career as a teacher of young children. She's spent the last 17 years in both public and private rural and urban classrooms. She's worked in school improvement and now higher education, always with a focus on building relationships, fostering reciprocal learning, and engaging in reflective dialogue with others. I am well connected with Julie. She's my study group facilitator for the Greater Dayton Reggio Study Group, and has become a great friend. So we're super excited. She's a great public speaker, and we're happy to have her here today. So welcome, Julie.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Justin.
Yeah. Absolutely. Dr. Biddle, I have had Katie introduce me for stuff before. And it's always like slightly awkward, isn't it? To hear like her, she reads through a paragraph. Yeah, so when you have to sit there and listen to that, always very nice and very complimentary, right? But it's always like a slightly awkward thing as you hear her introduce yourself.
Yeah.
Well, you heard her, Dr. Biddle, her little intro, but why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe just a little bit about kind of your passion in this work.
Well, I'm passionate about doing the right thing for young children, and I am a human being who likes to play as well. So play is really a thing that I'm passionate about because it's the way that we all, as you mentioned earlier, as humans, we build relationships through play. And it's a foundational part of how we learn. So I'm really excited to be able to have a conversation with the two of you about play.
Yeah, thanks. So tell me a little bit, like, what is play? I mean, it's easy to say play, right? But really, what is it, and why do you feel like it's so important?
Well, I think play is joyful, and play is fundamental to our human well-being, and it doesn't matter how old or how young we are. In order to be a whole person, we must have the opportunity to play in an unstructured way, to have choices, and really play is the medium or the tool by which we naturally learn. Think about young children, and from the time a child is born, they begin to explore their environment through playful ways as well as through experimenting. And the older that we get, we like to play with ideas. And if we're not playing with ideas and thinking about things that we're curious about, our learning stops or slows down. And so in order for us to continue to grow and develop, we need to be able to be pursuing our passions, our curiosities, the things that we wonder about, and play is a perfect medium for that.
Yeah, I think as we talk through play, how this so much connects to trauma-informed care is that when we talk about young children and the importance of relationships, so we talk over and over and over again, play is the way that we start developing, interacting, and forming those micro interactions or those strong relationships. It's also the way the kids can represent the world around themselves as we talk about healing through trauma, but allowing kids those opportunities to rework or redevelop some of their experiences through play is kind of how they're learning to navigate the world around them, and to help some of those previous experiences kind of be relived and recreated to help heal too. So it's just like so vitally important that we have this going on right now in our schools, which kind of leads into some of the things that we'll be talking about next.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually think before we even jump into the next question, I'm gonna ask you a question that wasn't on the list that Katie sent you. So if you're ready, I'm already knocking myself down. She's gonna definitely still like you more than me by the end of this. So you said the word unstructured, and I could picture teachers out here on a walk, whatever, listening. They're listening to this podcast. And they hear the word unstructured, and they think, nope, not in school, not in a classroom. What is it about unstructured play, specifically in school? How can that work? Maybe just talk a little bit. That's very generic, I know, but like, how does that work, unstructured play in school?
So that's a really important question. When I say unstructured, I mean that it is space and time that allows children to make choices so that they have some agency over what it is that they're doing. They are not being told, these are the things that you need to do first, second, third, fourth. And if you don't get through all of those, then you're going to miss recess, which is part of what happens in many of our schools. And it's probably the children who miss recess are the children who most need recess. So, but the unstructured time is space and time where children have choices. And that's really an important piece for creating a classroom environment that is safe, that creates space for children to belong. And it goes back to that Maslow, hierarchy of needs that, and it fits, I think, with what we're talking about in relationship to trauma-informed education, that if children don't have their basic needs met and feel safe, those are the first two levels of Maslow, they're never going to get to level 3, which is where active learning can begin. So the unstructured time is another vehicle that permits children to be able to have a sense of safety and belonging, because their choices are what's driving what they do.
Yeah, and I would just piggyback on that, Julie, and just saying, like, if you look at any teacher evaluation rubric right now, it calls for student choice and voice, that kids should have autonomy to make some decisions about their learning. If we look at the principles of universal design for learning, those are the foundations of allowing the teacher to act as the facilitator and the kids have some choice. And I don't want anybody to hear, we say this all the time, boundaries are good. It doesn't mean it's the Wild West in there and kids are just like running around the room. It's not a daycare center, right? But we can offer really thought-provoking provocations and things to inspire, or offer materials for kids to have some open-ended decision-making and allowing them to have that growth mindset to fail and to try and rework some things within the classroom at any level. And this goes for, I feel like it gets less and less and less, which I know we're going to talk about here in a moment. But middle school, high school, we should still be playing. We should still have student choice and autonomy. Staff, professional development with staff should have choice and some autonomy and some decision making too. So I think those are all really important things that you just brought up as well.
Yeah. Okay, so misconceptions that surround play. What are some of those that you could highlight for us? And not that you have to debunk them all, right this second, but I think it's good for us to at least talk about them and acknowledge that there are some misconceptions surrounding play, specifically in school.
Yeah, I think that the primary misconception is that if children are playing, they are not learning. And that is so not true. There are so many things that children learn through play. And when I began thinking about this, it was like, I can't think of anything that they don't learn during play. Seriously. I mean, children build relationships, so they have to learn how to get along with one another. They're learning how to take turns, they're learning how to take risks, they're learning how to negotiate and cooperate. All of those social emotional skills that are necessary for life and for being a well-rounded individual. But they're also learning academic related skills. I mean, they're learning to work with patterns, to construct, to count, to classify, to sort and order. They're learning how to talk with one another, so their language is developing. They're experimenting. They're all of these things that are so important to academic learning. And so that is the number one myth, that during play you aren't learning, but you are learning so many things.
Yeah, I was going to say, as a classroom teacher for many years, you have to, like, just like with trauma-informed care, there is some judgment that comes, like, all our kids are just playing in the morning, right? What learning is going on until they really see, and I think the art of, we've talked about this over the year, the art of, a really accomplished teacher is that quality questioning and anchoring it back to you and being able to extend and further kids' interest, to be able to start building on some of this play experience for those extended project-based learning experiences and those kind of things. But it's certainly, I agree with you, Julie, there's some misconception. People are like, oh, it's just crazy in there. Everyone's just playing all the time. And I see something that Justin really works really hard on that I think people, sometimes it's a misconception, is that teaching kids how to have downtime.
Yeah.
I feel like people feel like kids, they don't know how to self-entertain anymore. And I feel like you do a really good job about...
Yeah, they have to, because we have to be able to figure it out, right? We can't just always have somebody that's scheduling out every minute of our day or things like that. We have to be able to know how to entertain ourselves and how to engage with things ourselves. And I think that's not something that we spend too much time on, unfortunately, in schools anymore officially, right? Officially, every second of your day is scheduled out. And it's which is insanity and incredibly overwhelming and stressful to everyone involved, teachers and students alike. So having downtime and having them kind of figure it out I think is good. Actually, there were times when I was teaching, especially at my previous place, where I had more of a classroom of my own, and kids would come up and say, we'd be in between things, or maybe they finished something early or something like that. They'd say, I'm bored, I don't know what to do. And I'm not the most lovey-dovey person in the world, but I would say, well, my job's not necessarily to entertain you. Like, I think you can go, all the options. Like, go pick one of the options. Go find something. Or if there's something you think of that you want to engage with, like, come ask me if that's all right. Like, that's great. Like, we can figure it out. And it always was interesting at the beginning of years. Kids would take a while to adjust, as that was a different kind of system than what they were used to, I think.
Expectations in your classroom were different from what they had in previous years. I mean, I think about the seminal research in play regarding the difference between work and play, and how the difference between how adults define those two words and how children define those two words. Children's work is their play. And if during their choice time of play, they are choosing to work in the writing center, for example, and copying letters or making letters, writing letters to friends, writing stories, to them, it's play because they chose to do it. But if the teacher had said, okay, it's time to get your journals out and begin writing a story, children would identify that as work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the way children engage in the same exercise, if they're thinking of it as play, their engagement is so much higher than if they're thinking of it as work because the teacher has assigned it. I think that's really instructive for us as people who work with students.
And I think it's a big, what's great about that and that explanation, Dr. Biddle, is this idea that it's just a shift, right? We're not getting something different we're getting the same thing out of the kid. We're actually getting more out of the kid, right? But we're accomplishing the same task, if that's how you want to, from my teacher point of view. We're accomplishing the same task, but we're doing it in a way that's more engaging to the student, and that they are viewing it again as potentially play or enjoyment, however you want to define it, right? But they're perceiving it as something that's enjoyable as opposed to a task I now have to check off the list so that I can get done and do something I enjoy.
It's the difference between student engagement and student compliance.
Yeah.
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 That's good, Julie. That's really a good way to think about it. I like that. I'm gonna take that one with me this year. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think so often we're after compliance, right? Too often we probably fall, if we're looking at like getting all the tasks done as teachers, we're after compliance a little bit too much than we are after anything else, right? And I think that's a good shift. So one misconception, again, we kind of touched on it already, but I think a misconception that I would think of as far as that surrounds play is, again, that idea that it stops at elementary school, right? And doesn't extend beyond that. Would you mind talking about that just for maybe a minute, what that looks like, or what that mindset is maybe when you're a middle school or a high school teacher?
I can talk about it as an adult. I mean, if I have a day that I don't ride my bicycle, it's not a good day. I mean, that's part of my play. If I have a day that I don't read for pleasure, that's part of my play. So I think about middle school and high school students who have interests, personal interests of their own, whether it's sports or dance or some kind of club or just enjoyment in playing music or hanging out with friends. Those are all things that, again, if they're choosing to do those things, they would identify them as a place for joy, a place for enjoyment, and not work. And so we still need to create in schedules for our older students, our middle and high school students, and I would say college students as well, that time to breathe, to relax, to be fully ourselves. And I remember, personal story, when I first started teaching, I was so in love with being a teacher that I worked 7 days a week, almost 24/7, just because I was so happy to be a teacher. And it didn't take very many years of me doing that I realized that I was not being a fully myself. And so I made a shift and said, I'm going to work really hard Monday through Friday, and the weekends are going to be mine. I will go to the museums that I want to visit. I will attend concerts. I will take longer walks. I will read. I will do the things that help me be a full person. And when I began making that shift, I was a much better teacher. I was much more prepared to go back into the classroom on Monday. And I brought much more to the classroom experience for my students. I think that space to play really helps us be a more fully real human being. And it doesn't matter if you're in middle school or high school or an adult.
Yeah, and I think that's such a good point. And I think that hopefully everybody that's a teacher out there or in education in general, and honestly, even if you're not in education, like if you are for some reason listening to this podcast,
a lot of parents that listen,
like that's such a good word to hear. That whole little last part, listen to that, go back, listen to Dr. Biddle say that again, right? Because you have to be a whole person. You can't just live your whole life doing just this one thing. All right, I'm going to keep us moving a little bit forward. That was really good. I appreciate you answering that. And so as we kind of recover from learning loss, right, we're still in that spot. We're going to be in that spot for years, unfortunately. It's just reality. So as we're kind of recovering from some learning loss, our school days are kind of scheduled down to this last minute. We touched on this a little bit, but what's the impact of having a school day that's scheduled every single minute on the move, doing something scheduled out? Yeah, instructionally. Yeah.
Well, you touched on it a little earlier, Justin, when you said that it's stressful. It's stressful to have every minute of every day structured. And, I have heard in classrooms as I visited for years, teachers saying, hurry up, we have to get to. And that hurrying up and getting to the next task is, what does it result in? Well, with young children, it results in something that is scribbled and not their best work. It creates, if we think about the fight or flight or freeze of trauma, it really touches on that freeze because, oh my goodness, I have to be hurried and I can't do that. It really engenders a lack of respect for children and students. It engenders a lack of respect for careful thinking and working and deliberating and reflecting. And it really is stressful for everyone involved. It's not healthy. It's not a healthy way to be. And I would say that it's borderline malpractice in an education field to create that kind of environment. That is not a healthy environment, and that is going to create a lack of feeling like you belong or that you're safe. If you're always moving from one task to another without any moment of space to breathe or to stretch or to move. I mean, we know that body movement is really important in brain development, especially with the younger children in our school environments. And movement is really not permitted typically when you're hurrying through. The only movement is sort of rushing down the hall to the next thing, or when the bell rings and you're rushing to your next class. Being structured like that is the opposite of what I've been advocating for in this conversation around unstructured time. It's the polar opposite of it.
Yeah, Julie, I think you said something really impactful that I see teachers chronically miss during instructional periods even, is because we're rushing from one thing to the next. Those conversations of reflection and debriefing. If you go back to good writer workshop models or classroom structures, it's a lot of direct instruction, and then we're not having time for that actual processing. It kind of ties back into like restorative practices and all those things that we talk about, that time to have conversations, to reflect, that it doesn't have to be the 20 task things, that we can go in depth about something, have longer, more slower pace, sustainable projects that we're taking on that have a lot of good quality conversation, and you'll see a much bigger impact in learning than to have the 20 tasks done because you feel like you had to grade every single thing. I know you're probably going to want to touch about the stress response system, so I'll let you kind of just like the operations of like just being in that high stress and the impacts for that.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that it's, when you're constantly stressed, you're constantly under, you don't want to say threat, but to an extent, depending on your background, you are. I mean, best case scenario, even if you're under a lot of stress, you still are like, I've got a lot of pressure on myself, and I'm worried about what happens if I don't, right? And that takes its toll on anybody. That takes its toll on us. Like when you take, again, a look at teachers, we see this all the time, right? Where it's teachers that are like, yeah, but what if I don't get 190 minutes or 130 minutes worth of reading in every single day? Like, what if I don't get the 90 minutes of the math program in? Like, then I don't know what we think is going to happen. Somebody's going to come get us or something. I
The
don't
reading police are going to show up at your door
Yes.
and say, shame on you, and we're going to lock you up, right? That's
Yeah.
what's going to happen. It's
Yeah.
what happens if you get 30 minutes of quality reading, of quality discussion, of conversation, where a teacher can ask a student a question and then say, tell me more about that. Or what do others think? Think about the quality of that kind of conversation that happens in 30 or 45 or even 190 minutes or whatever that is. But it's about reading. It's not just reading.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we talk about this pretty frequently. Like, I think if you're looking at time, I'm a person, like, just personality-wise, time's on my mind all the time. I'm kind of always clocking where I'm at time-wise. That's why I keep track of our time for the podcast and not Katie. But I think that it would initially seem like to me, like, oh, I'm wasting some of my classroom time. But I think what people come to find out is that you actually, by spending time on these other things, these human things, that what we do is we actually maximize our time. And like you kind of said, like, you get more done in 30 minutes maybe than what you would have gotten done in 130 minutes. But that's because you're getting actual quality over just quantity. And we can't sustain quantity. Like, it's impossible for any students. We say kids a lot, and I don't want to, like, have high school people tune that out. When I say kids, I mean anybody in school. Yeah. Students, right? Yeah. But if we constantly keep our students going, it's not sustainable. You cannot stay focused for 6.5 hours a day or whatever. It's not possible. We can't do it. Like, kids can't do it either. Students can't do it either. And so you have to be able to, like, wisely and intentionally use your time. And I think when you're using your time wisely and intentionally, then all of a sudden you don't have to go, but you can have some of this unstructured productive time that you're talking about. And I think that's pretty huge. Can you talk about play and how it benefits regulation? So that's kind of what we're already talking about, but I'd kind of be curious to hear your thoughts on play and regulation.
Well, I think that what happens, children learn what they can and cannot do during play. And they learn in that building of language skills and cooperative skills and taking risk in play, self-regulation. So, I mean, I think about us as adults and we will say to, our students, don't do that because, and what's the first thing that student will do as soon as the adult is no longer looking? Well, they're going to try it because they were told they couldn't do it. And if it's something that they find out, oh, I don't like what happened, typically they will not do it again. And they would have done that anyway if they hadn't been told they couldn't do it or shouldn't do it. They will learn self-regulation in, the sort of how our brain works and the executive functions that, we learn to plan, we analyze, and we manage. And we learn that self-regulation as our brain develops. And as our initial right brain is stronger than our left brain. And as the body grows, they begin to coordinate together. And a lot of that happens in big body play. And, these kinds of developments in our brain and in our body, start with young children, but don't really come to, full maturity until, young adulthood. So we all are learning self-regulation at different levels. And a lot of that happens through relationships, and relationships are really at the forefront of what play offers us. And so I think that, again, offering children time to play offers them time to learn more about self-regulation. And the key there is self-regulation intrinsically, rather than the extrinsic motivation of, well, if you do this, you're going to get a sticker. Well, how do we help our children intrinsically make the decisions that are appropriate? It's that self-regulation.
Yeah, I was thinking about, Julie, when we did a book study called Purposeful Play, and just, I think the aha part that I had was that rough and tumble play. There's different genres of play that kids experience, and everybody plays differently. We kind of talked through that. But the rough and tumble play outside, allowing that time and space appropriate, right? We don't want kids fist fighting outside the playground by any means. But I mean, rough and tumble play is a part of development and allowing them to run around. And I think a lot of times we are so quick to shut that down. But of giving them the time and space to have those large gross motor activities and kids engaging in that manner reminded me of that. And then I also started thinking about co-regulation. Especially, we are pack animals. We are designed. We talk about this a lot. Those mirror beings, and you start establishing those relationships, but you also are establishing co-regulation. And really, it's a good way to start off your day, allowing kids to come in and enter and start regulating with each other before we even start our learning community. So, just a couple things came to mind for me.
Yeah, I think it's funny because I think what we've done too is we've gotten so we've probably gone through stretches. I'm sure it swings back and forth. And I'm not saying we're in some horrible spot with it right now, but I think in education, we can be really good about telling kids. So we'll tell kids how to regulate. We'll tell kids how to relax. We'll tell kids we'll teach kids, right? We have SEL curriculums, not knocking that. I think there's a place for that. That's part of it, right? Teaching is part of it. But that lack of letting them actually experience it, right? So you could tell me how to run a machine all day long or do whatever, paint a painting, you name it. You could tell me about it all day long. But unless I actually get a chance to practice and experience it, what in the world good is that doing for me? It's not doing me much good, And I hear that a lot in what you're saying. Like, so it's necessary to have that practice with it. And that's what we're really trying to allow kids to do instead of just telling them.
Yeah.
What are some things that educators could do in their classroom? This episode is going to initially air right probably just before a lot of teachers go back to school.
Yeah, or right after.
Obviously, some people will be listening to it, in the middle of winter or something at some point. But initially, this is going to be dropping then. What are some things that educators can do as they start their year to help increase play? And I'm going to attack another question onto that too. So what are some concrete things they can maybe do? But what are some maybe easy habits they can build to where they don't forget to live in this kind of world?
Well, I think that one of the first things that teachers need to think about is their environment. And, the structure of the environment and the kinds of messages that the environment sends to the students that enter. Is the environment already created for them when they enter the classroom as a teacher space? Or is there room in the environment for the students to help make it their own? And so, how are classroom norms established? Are they established before the students even enter? Or are they established with the students so that the students feel ownership over the space and how they will live together in that space? I think those are really important. And part of the environment is, connected to the routines and the schedule. And so I think that, as you begin a school year, you need to think about how that routine, what routines are going to be important, and what structures are going to need to be in place. Because I think our goal should be to be creating a community of learners. And so recognizing that we all don't learn the same way or in the same time, but that we all can learn. And believing that of all of our children and all of our students is an important mindset to have as a teacher. You know, what is my image of my students? Do I believe they all are capable of learning? You know, if I don't believe that, wow, that changes what happens in that classroom. But if I do believe that, then how do I create spaces and different time frames for the children who need that difference? Difference is good. Difference is healthy. So I think those are, and you know, going back to Maslow, you know, if we create a space where basic needs are met. I remember walking into Katie's room when she was in the classroom and recognizing that there was no snack time, but snack was available to the children at any time they were hungry. And she had established a routine for that was very child-centered and need-centered. It's those kinds of ways of thinking that I think make a huge difference in creating a sense of community and belonging that is necessary for our students to really be active learners, engaged in learning. As a teacher, I also need to think about what space am I going to have in my day that will help me be a better person. And some days it's easier than others, but recognizing that you're really focused on, as much as possible, being your best self, being your best listener, and your best self with the students that you work with day in and day out.
Yeah, Julia, I also was thinking about, I think a mind shift or like a habit Justin was talking about is that you also are a learner with your students, that you do not have to go in and say your kids are really interested in spiders or bridges or how a certain machines or systems work. You don't have to be like a college level expert on anything to go in and be a co-learner with your students. And is it okay to say, well, I don't know, let's figure that out? I mean, to do that, I mean, the joy of doing that every year with your kids and engaging in learning and being a model of good and a steward of learning with them is just so impactful. And it's such a fun way to every year to look different. If you're always in February, we're going to do this unit a theme every February, and you are the master holder of all the facilitated learning in there, then at some point, you can't think year 6, we're doing the same activity again, right? So just being open to your kids' interests, yes.
It's so liberating to be able to say, I don't know, but how can we find out? Mm-hmm. And that sense of reciprocity, you know, learning with and from one another is really absolutely the most liberating to a teacher. And especially if you're, you know, a young teacher sort of entering the field, the worry that many young teachers have about, well, what if I don't know an answer? That's really okay, because you can come to find that answer together.
Yeah, I always go back to the Malaguzzi quote, like nothing without joy. I hold on to that all the time. Does this bring me joy? I think Jessica talked about that a lot during our summer self-care kind of episode, but like, what does joy actually mean? So. Yeah.
And I think too, like I think back to like high school, you know, middle school, you have different periods of kids coming in for different amounts of, you know, short blocks, but how fun it is. Just like in elementary school, every year your classroom has a different personality, right? Classrooms have personalities. And so every period has a different personality. And instead of trying to jam each of your periods of your day into the box, you know, that is your personality, what if you leaned in and allowed yourself to experience, you know, that fourth period doesn't have to look the same as sixth period, even if they're the exact same class. Doesn't mean you're not even teaching the same stuff or getting the same instruction in those classes. But what if it could feel different? What if it had a whole different rhythm to it? What if it had a whole different, you had a whole different personality with it even that you were allowed to access? because you're not a robot that just has to go through and do the same thing every single period of the day. That can get old. You talk about year to year. I mean, day to day, if you're doing the exact same lesson, four different times, that can get old by the fourth time unless you lean in to that different personality.
Yeah.
Of that class, of that period.
Yeah, I agree. Well, we have something exciting coming up.
We do, yeah.
Julie, do you want to talk a little bit about, we have a conference, so that's coming up in September. So I'll let Julie talk a little bit about that and the content of it, and how to get registered if you're interested in attending.
Yeah, the Ohio Voices for Learning Reggio Inspired Forum is an Ohio network of Reggio Inspired educators, and every fall we have an Inspired Teachers Institute. This fall, it's going to be held at Stingley Elementary in Centerville, and Katie and Justin are going to be our keynote speakers. It's scheduled for Friday, September 22nd in the evening, and Saturday, the 23rd. And registration will be open sometime mid-August, if not before that, on our Ohio Voices for Learning website. And we have a proposal for if you're interested in presenting there. The focus is on how the Reggio approach is an anecdote, if you will, for working in a trauma-informed way with children, because the principles of the Reggio approach really touch on all of the things that trauma-informed education proposes and suggests are best practices for working with children who've experienced trauma. And quite honestly, we've all experienced trauma of some shape or form in the last few years. And so it will be a good way to revisit Reggio inspired practices for those of us that I've been a student of the practice for 30 some years, and I'm still learning more about it. And we're looking forward to a great turnout and a great opportunity for learning and having a good dialogue with Justin and Katie and others. So check out our ohiovoices.org page and plan to be with us.
Yeah, and we'll make sure to have that linked when we air this episode, so they'll be linked on there. And I will say I've attended this conference many times as a teacher, and I always leave so inspired. The timing of it is great because you're just got your classroom community up and running. I leave and I feel so good about being around other educators who absolutely just love children and want to create great learning experiences. And so I definitely highly recommend if you want to come and just kind of get re-engaged or find your joy again in learning, this is a great conference to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're super excited to be able to be a part of it. What a honor, honestly, to be able to be a part of that, to be able to share. And we just really appreciate that opportunity for sure as well.
Well, I think it's timely. I think it's a timely topic because teachers are concerned about the children and in their classrooms and the students in their classrooms, and want to have some ideas and honestly to hear what's happening in other places and how people are coping.
Yeah, absolutely.
Julie, as we kind of close out the episode, is there one thing you want people to walk away just really taking a hold of as we kind of end today? And I know you do some educational consulting and those kind of things. Is there a way for people to get connected with you if they're interested in the Reggio certificate program at Antioch or educational consulting? So can you kind of leave us with those two things, just maybe like a final note and then a way to contact you?
I think one of the things that I came across as I was thinking about play was a quote by Elizabeth Jones, and she's an author of Play Practice. And she said, "It's through play that young children get smart, and it's through play that adults stay smart." And I think that the idea of creating play as part of our practice is perhaps what I would like to leave today's conversation with. Thinking about how play can be an integral part of our practice. As far as getting in touch with me, we have a concentration in our MED program that's focused on the Reggio-inspired Reggio Emilia approach. We also have a concentration in trauma-informed education in our MED or experienced educators program. And you can get in touch with me by email, and that is jbiddle1@antioch.edu. And I'm more than happy to get you connected to people in the programs or to have a conversation with you as a consultant. Thanks, Katie.
Awesome.
Thanks, Justin.
Yeah, thank you so much. We just really appreciate you being able to come on the podcast with us, be our very first guest.
Yeah.
And to be able to just share a little bit about play and the importance of that, just to humans, not just to kids, not just in school, but to us as people. And we thank all of you for listening and tuning in as always, jumping in and joining the conversation with us. Hopefully, I can't imagine you listening and not having walked away with something that is going to either inspire you or remind you of why you enjoy teaching, or maybe even inspire a little bit of change or a shift in what you do, hopefully this year or whatever time frame you're listening to this in. But we just appreciate you being a part of the conversation and joining in with us. Now let's go out there and do the work.
Let's go do the work now.
Let's go play.
Yeah, let's go play. Yes.
Hey everybody, let's keep the conversation going.
Like and subscribe below and keep the comments rolling.